what the fun thing about playing golf in a job interview is you're playing with some of the other engineers there, and they want to hit a shot, and they drop down a brand new Titleist ball and they fire it off into the woods. I think, wow, this is really cool.
All right, everybody. How you doing? How you living? This is Chris. I'm back. No Putts Given, episode 104 or something. You'll notice that Tony is not here today. We've replaced him with the VP of Product Design, Engineering, R&D, all that good stuff at Cobra Golf, Tom Olsavsky. And so Tony's out. Tom's in this week. First question, did we make a reasonable trade? Did we upgrade?
Well, his beard's actually looking pretty good these days, but I've got a little more experience, but I enjoyed chatting with Tony. I think he's good to chat with, and so are you, Chris. So it should be fun.
Yeah, he's in the midst of moving, selling his house, doing stuff, whatever. And I want to, pick your brain a little bit too on just kind of background of the industry, your story, how you got into stuff. You have a cool, unique story. And we want to kind of keep track of how many different companies you've been at while also yelling at Tony. So we're going to keep, we're going to put the over under at like 2.5. I think Vegas has it at 2.5. So we'll see. We'll see what we get to. And then I want to pick your brain on some of the distance stuff too, because I think you got a really good perspective, on that. We focus so much on the golf ball manufacturer side, but not necessarily the equipment manufacturer side. So, So how long have you been doing this, designing golf clubs? When did this all start for you?
Yeah, so good question for sure. I got started in 1990, and so that was I think Tony was probably 10 back then or whatever. So I could have yelled at him, but I didn't know him. So in 1990, I was in the Midwest. I was working for Alcoa, in the wheel business.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, I worked for Goodyear. Those were my first two jobs out of college as a mechanical engineer.
Okay.
And one of my hobbies was also working on golf clubs. My dad and I had torn them apart and re-gripped them and refinished them. Back then it was just wooden heads, so we used to refinish them and learned a whole bunch of things. And my dad and I used to do that in the basement or the garage, depending on if it was flammable materials or not.
And dependent upon what your mom knew was going on, or was that a consideration?
Well, back then everybody used gasoline to put grips on. So you basically, you put the grip tape on, you put some gasoline on, and you slid them on. So, that was the part that we did in the garage. Some of the other stuff we could do in the house. But it was good fun. It was good learning. And then when I got out of college, I was working in the wheel business, and wheels are interesting, but wheels are pretty much always round, and they're not super exciting. But, it was part of the fun that when you are in the wheel business, you go to lunch. In the parking lot, you're looking at wheels, oh, look at those wheels and these wheels and who made that wheel. And so, that was interesting. But, I was a golfer at heart. I'd been playing since I was 5 with my dad and family members. And so, I met another engineer there at the Goodyear company when I started. We had started refinishing golf clubs for a local country club. And so, we'd take them into his townhouse. He had a basement, and we can go downstairs and do all the woodwork and the refinishing and all that and get them back to the pro shop. So that was part of it. And then he moved to a place that didn't have a basement. So we're like, okay, wife said not doing that in his living room. So we stopped doing that. We started making clubs. Back then you could buy them from Golfsmith, who's no longer in business, but you could buy components. There's a few other places now where you could buy components. And back then I used to make a golf club with a steel shaft for about $11 of cost. And
that was everything.
For $25.
Yeah. So $11, that got you the club, the head, the shaft, grip, turn around, sell it for $25, make $14 a club, and away you went. And what were those called? What was the name?
Tour Model 2.
Good old Tour Model 2. I wonder if anybody still has some of those around. I bet somebody does. They got to be, right? And they may have been made by you, right? So there's a chance if you got some in your garage,
good point.
You might have some original Tom Olsavsky Tour Model 2 assembled golf clubs, right? What would those be worth today?
Oh, geez, if they were $25 in 1987,
Maybe
you know,
$12 now, 11.
yeah, have you looked at used golf clubs on online to try and sell them? They're not worth as much as you think they're worth.
No, no, they're certainly not. And so you do that. You're a Midwest guy, Youngstown, Ohio.
Mhm.
Grew up. I got a lot of family that area too. My dad grew up in Parma, just outside Cleveland, and very much a blue collar, right? Especially
Sure.
that area. And so you kind of grow up doing a lot of hands-on stuff, taking stuff apart, putting it back together.
Hmm.
Went to school, obviously, you said mechanical engineering, and then kind of takes us into 1990s. Tires are round, but you go, there's some golf stuff out there. How did you make the leap from that into golf directly? What was your first golf job?
Yeah, one of the things I saw, I was in Mechanical Engineering magazine. It was for a golf club engineer at Titleist.
Okay.
I was like, that would be interesting, and learning how to do that, and taking a hobby into a profession. So, was lucky enough to be a good candidate. Got up to New Bedford, Massachusetts, for an interview.
God bless New Bedford.
Yeah, you guys were just there. Lovely
Mhm.
place. And then got the second interview. On the second interview, we played golf. And what the fun thing about playing golf in a job interview is you're playing with some of the other engineers there, and they want to hit a shot, and they drop down a brand new Titleist Ballot, and they fire it off into the woods. I was like, wow, this is really cool. Speaking of
Right?
blue collar kid, he used to find golf balls in the woods and play with them. It's like Titleist, ooh, and the guy's just dropping balls. And it's like every other hole, they're dropping a ball and firing in the woods. So like, that's
Uh-huh.
pretty cool.
Well, still, right? Still, the number one played ball in golf actually is whatever you find. That's still the
Right.
actual number one
Mhm.
played ball in golf. But at this time, so you go out to New Bedford, Massachusetts, about an hour south of Boston. Titleist was there, but you weren't in Massachusetts forever, right? What was kind of going on in the early 90s?
Yeah, the whole thing there was, they wanted to grow a club business, and they brought a guy named John Hovlick in who was at Tommy Armour, and
Hmm.
said, "Hey, grow the golf business, golf club business. Start building a business there." So we started that in New Bedford. We did a lot of research, running robots and doing some core research stuff. And
Yeah.
eventually, they said, "Hey, you guys actually got to start making some product. You can't just be research the whole time." So,
Why not?
um,
Why can't I just sit here and think about stuff? Why do I got to produce anything?
yeah, every now and then you got to pay the bill. So um, John was saying, "Hey, we need to be in Southern California. That's where the golf industry is, the golf club industry is."
Hmm.
And so we moved out at the end of 1993. And you guys know from being in New Bedford that New Bedford's a nice place. It's on the coast. It's kind of have okay weather for up there,
Great
but it's
fish,
not
great food.
Carlsbad.
No, it's not
Yeah,
Carlsbad. It's not Southern California.
yeah,
The Acushnet Creamery. I'm a big fan of the Acushnet Creamery,
hmm,
and like I said, I mean it's a working class population. It's a factory kind of based
yes,
operate. You got a lot of industrial, a lot of factory, and a lot of um, a lot of seafood, right? So you have
yep.
fishing
Fishing, yeah, a lot
industries
of fishing
huge,
industries. Yeah, hmm,
but it's not Southern California.
this is correct.
So you moved to Southern California, Titleist rather, sets up club operations Southern California. Who was already there in 93?
Well,
Who
it's
was
interesting
already at,
because
yeah.
there were six of us that came out from New Bedford, including John Hoflick.
Okay.
There's a guy named Art Chu was our boss of R&D. Peter Gilbert, who's an industry guy, a long time. We were
Okay.
kind of the four core guys that moved out. 40 Pitts was one of the guys that came out he was a testing technician. Now he's on tour with them. So
Okay.
that was kind of the small group that we started, and we added some people out here and brought in a tooling shop because back then, you did a lot of your own tooling work. So that was a small team we had. It was originally about 20 people in the original building. They've since rebuilt the building and all that kind of stuff. But that
Yeah.
was to move out and start doing things and getting really in the heart of the golf club industry.
Hmm.
And it's the heart of the industry because the industry, when it changed from forging and wooden heads into investment casting, that business was mostly in Los Angeles based on aerospace.
Okay.
And so you go from Los Angeles and say, hey, well, we got to finish these golf clubs and polish them and do other things to them. That was done down in Mexico, right over the border. So Carlsbad was right in the middle. And it was great, when you're coming from a different part of the country where you can't do any testing. in the winter. Carlsbad, you can test year round. So it was a great spot. It's still why the club industry is almost heavily based here, other than a few people, but that's where the core of it is, certainly. And so it's a great spot. We love it out here. When I first moved out, Palomar Airport Road was 2 lanes, one each way, and now it's 6 plus more sometimes. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, right? Early '90s, people don't necessarily remember. Like investment casting was a line of demarcation in golf club manufacturing, right? Like that was the thing. And with the vast majority of that being done in LA, like I said, finishing processes, etc., in Mexico, it made sense to be where the activity was, right? There was no real compelling reason to stay out east unless you had to, and boop, there you go. So, I mean, to date, right? I mean, a number of companies, TaylorMade, Callaway, Cobra, obviously Titleist, so on and so forth. About the only one of the big 5 that isn't, right? Ping is still in Arizona. But otherwise, Carlsbad is kind of the center of the golf R&D, golf club equipment side anyway, universe. So you're at Titleist for how long then?
I left Titleist in '96, so I did 6 total years there, left and went to TaylorMade. And so that was a pretty long period there, about 17 years. And then I've been at Cobra just about 9 years.
So 60. So you were at TaylorMade during some very interesting times, right? I mean, what was that like? I mean, when you come in '96, this is the beginning of Tiger Boom almost, right? '97. And really, equipment as something people really dialed into and focused on. I know it was exciting for people in the industry, but people outside the industry, maybe not so much. But the 2000s, that 2000 to 2010, 11, 12 time period, that decade, TaylorMade was in a lot of ways the equipment side of they were an absolute juggernaut, right? And you were a good part of that.
Well, yeah, that was a fun time, and there was a lot of great people that I worked with, and went through. A lot of what we refer to as, some of us old timers, is a bit of the golden age of golf club design evolution. When I got in the industry, the driver heads were between 125 and 150 cc's. They were all steel. We went through a lot of changes in that period, from going from steel to bigger heads, and then eventually to titanium and high COR designs and really big, improvements in the structural design capabilities. When I got in the industry in 1990, there were very few engineers that were actually working on golf club design. Back then, what you used to do, companies would do, is they would go over to a foundry, and in this case, whether it was in LA or somewhere, and say, hey, I'd love to get a design. And the tool makers there would have multiple designs and say, oh, I like that one. Let's do that one, and let's put some graphics in it. That's how they did it. There was no
just ordered off
studying. Yeah, there was no studying of design and shape and performance, and that was a lot of the reason I started with Acushnet. So when I was at TaylorMade, there was a lot of that focus too, because they had a history of good success, but they were also kind of in the early '90s. Callaway took them to task a little bit in the business, and so they said, hey, we've got to figure out how to compete and how to do better and make better products. So there was a lot of changes there when I went through it. When I got in there, they had just launched the bubble shafts.
TI bubble.
Yeah. So that was interesting. And then there was a lot of things after that were, developed and invented there. I did the first 300 series. I did some tour stuff at the time, R7, up all the way to one of Tony's favorites. I know was rocket balls, when I probably had to yell at them the first time. So, those were some of the good things.
But you got out just before jet speed, which, that maybe in hindsight, not a terrible time to have departed. But I want to go back to, you kind of call it the golden age of design, in the sense, like, you really weren't, like you said, you were ordering off a menu more or less. You were at the behest of designs other people had created, as opposed to saying, okay, let's take this all in-house. What can we do from a research and design perspective and figure stuff out? What, during your time at TaylorMade, there one or maybe a couple things that you're super proud of that, you can't have a golden age without examples, right? Like, hey, these are kind of lines of demarcation in that development process that really altered the course of the industry from that side, and you had your hands in some of those. Like what would be one or two that you feel like, you'd want to pin those up on your refrigerator, let mom say, hey, way to go, good job,
Sure. Yeah. A lot of them were a big group of people, and I was on the key front of some of the early innovations there with the hybrid clubs. I was out doing tour testing with guys with hybrid clubs and helping that process. So that was one that changed the industry really, in a big way, because now hybrid clubs are pretty prominent in many people's bags. Some of the first high COR 300 series stuff was under my watch, running the Metalwood team there. The R7 movable weights, again, we get into some of the other ones with, other performance aspects. Rocket balls was kind of a breakthrough in fairway wood performance. So some of those things were really interesting, but it was a whole, every year we had to challenge ourselves. How do we make it better? And that's what we do at Cobra as well. And Cobra has had a history of innovation there. So everybody was saying, hey, how do we make the head bigger? And how do we make it perform better when it's bigger? And how do we learn how these things perform? That was really the original reason I was hired, was to do research, to understand, okay, what does the center of gravity do and how does it work? And, all these things that are really important that we still work on to this day, was a lot of that history and that company. But there are also other companies, doing good things like Cobra.
Sure. Well, and you don't know what you don't know. I mean, like you're mentioning things that are commonplace to a lot of gear junkies now, things like you said, higher core, like the 300 series. I mean, were we pushing 830 yet, or 822, or were we, pushing over that 800
Sure.
mark?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, we were. You're getting there, but now we're talking about, I know it's a bad word, but decoupling in some ways, CT and core, and trying to get values. I mean, we're in a totally different. There's no way you could have anticipated at that time doing 300 series going, okay, I think there's going to be this characteristic time thing, and we're going to try to find a way to maximize and play within all the rules, absolutely, but try to maximize performance on all these different parts of the face. And you look at kind of what you've done at Cobra now in the last couple, 3-4 design cycles. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, one of the things that we know, and the industry conversation has always been, well, there's a speed limit and you can't be any faster. And it says, well, there's a whole bunch of things that aren't regulated. We're not regulating CG position. There's not a lot of regulations on some of the aerodynamic shaping you could do. Those combinations are always very relevant. When you think of the F9 Speedback, that was a combination of low CG and some aerodynamics. So those are things that you look at as a designer and say, hey, what are the trade-offs? What are the limitations? And where can we move to make better performance? And so every year we get better. Now, we don't get hugely better every single year, but there's definitely some jumps in there. For us, F9 was a big jump, from where we had been prior. I think this LTD X and LS heads are both big jumps, and we're getting a lot of good buzz in the market with the way they're tested and the way people are having success with them. So, you can still make improvements. I get it that there is a speed limit that's been governed, no different than there's been a limit on golf balls and other things. So
sure,
we're definitely able to improve performance. And I think the product has never been better availability-wise in the industry for fitting golfers.
Yeah.
You see the growth of fitting continue to be very successful. And we hear often of a guy walking into a fitting location picking up 20 yards. Well, that's because he probably wasn't fit well before, or he didn't have access, or any number of reasons.
Right.
But we know that there's performance definitely out there for individual golfers. And that's the key. Everybody plays golf by themselves. They don't play with your swing or my swing. They play by their own.
I hope not. Yeah. I mean, for me, they can have yours. That's totally fine.
When and you not see, Tony's either.
No, we don't want Tony's. With the F9 Speedback, I want to go to that for a second because, dropping the skirt, right, and the design elements, some of the key design elements on F9, I know that you've seen this. I've seen it. There's an awful lot of other drivers, a generation, 2 generations later, that seem to have picked up on that as an aerodynamic property that you go, that's kind of cool. Now, no doubt, teams are looking, you guys are constantly looking at what other people are making. You're taking it, tearing it apart. They're taking your stuff, tearing it apart. do you kind of sit there and smile to yourself a little bit when you see things that you've done and put into a design that you know damn well somebody else said, hey, that's a great idea. We're going to go ahead and use that in ours as well. Like, how, I mean, you kind of smile a little bit or smirk a little bit, maybe.
Well, you smile and then you get frustrated because, our conversation we had a little bit earlier this week was, how do we get noticed as Cobra as a brand? We've been an innovative brand. We're going to be 50 years old next year. We've been innovative along the way. So I think the challenge a little bit in this industry is everybody wants to say they're innovative, but some are more innovative than others.
Sure.
But the whole goal of business is to win in the business side, which is sales, and so
Sure.
Even though you're innovative, if you're not winning in sales as much as you want, you have a big goal out there. And that's our challenge from a business standpoint. We know we have to do some things as our brand is, certainly to get noticed and to bring attention to ourselves, because the status quo mentality that happens in the world sometimes means that we don't even get in a hit bay and someone doesn't even hit our product.
Right.
We know when we get our product in a hit bay and do a product comparison where people are testing it with an open mind, we do very well. But if we don't get in that hit bay, we've got to do something to get noticed.
Yeah, you don't have a chance. I mean, I think that's totally fair in the sense that, like, as I look back at it, there's two products that historically I've loved from Cobra. One was the original LTD 3-wood. I still struggle to find something that's better than that in terms of design. And you look at the subsequent big tour models, things that you guys have stuck pretty close to what made that, kind of a cult type following within there. And then the other one is this year, like you said, the LTDX, LS, and, standard LTDX driver heads. It seems like put together a lot of the things that you learned from F9, change some of the things that, were acoustically not where you wanted them to be on the last one, and kind of solved a couple of those problems. And it's like, okay, this is, I mean, if there weren't a company with a red carbon face this year, that one might be getting a lot more attention, right? I mean, and I guess that, like you said, maybe that's the challenge, is how does Cobra go from like gold medal adjacent, like within, it's like, when you're running that race, the 100 meters at the Olympics, the difference between first and not even on the podium can be 0.04 of a second.
Sure. Yeah.
And sometimes those are odd factors like popularity or, other things not related to performance. We see that Cobra performs really, really well on the Metalwood side, has historically. So how do you go from that to being in the hit bay, so that people are trying it? What do you do to go from that position to in every conversation? How do you do that?
Yeah, those are big challenges. We think about those every day, and I think the that's the $100-200 million question, right? Is how do we go from where we are with great product to having great product but having much more sales? And that's the challenge of the business. How do we get into the mindset of the conversation and all that? And those are tough ones. You have to try a number of things. You have to try and sometimes fail, and try and sometimes succeed. And that's a constant battle of our business. But from our side, on the R&D side, our challenge is always, how do we make the product better? And that's what we think about, 8, 9, 10 hours a day in every aspect, because these gains we're seeing aren't just one little thing. Right. They could be sometimes 3 or 4 little things of performance that add up to a bigger whole. So that's what we're looking at. We often say that we're trying to, find some needles in haystacks, and hope we can get enough needles to make a jab into the market size.
Well, what we see too, I think, on our survey data side, we see people associate, by and large, our readers associate Cobra with that term innovation, which that's probably something you guys like to hear because you feel like it represents what you guys are doing. It's not hyperbole, it's not over nonsense hype, marketing, etc. But the other thing we hear too is like, consumers say they latch onto things about companies that are different, like a defining characteristic. I play Titleist golf balls because blank, and people may have a good reason for that. What do you think is that defining characteristic or that hallmark characteristic of Cobra that people that are very loyal, because there's a number of people that are, what is it about Cobra that they kind of latch onto and say, you know what, that's different than Callaway, that's different than TaylorMade, that's different than Titleist, that's different than Ping. I get people ask me a lot, why do you play a Cobra driver? Because I played it the last 2 years, and my answer is different than others. It's, well, I tested it and it performed best for, like, I just go based on performance. Like, okay, really boring answer, right? But what do you think that is for other people?
Well, I think that's mixed. Like you said, Chris, when we look at these reasons why you buy a club or why you choose a club, you guys are data guys, right? You're about, hey, what performs better is what I'm going to play. Right. There's a number of people in the industry that aren't data guys, and they're going to play sort of what there's recommended to them or what they may have been used to. Or again, a lot of these are like, hey, if I like the brand, and sometimes we look at our business a little bit like automotive manufacturers. Now, every mid-sized sedan has 4 wheels and air conditioning and an engine. Yeah, they all are very comparable. But why do you buy? You buy because of the feeling of that brand. So there's a lot of people that drive their purchase decision that way. And as a challenger brand, we've gone through evolutions in our history at Cobra over the past 49 years. At times we were just seniors and women's, and some people think of us still as just seniors and women's.
That was an identity, right? I mean, in the past, the Cobra identity, I mean, I think there's a lot of people think of it as a brand for seniors and a brand for women, or there's probably some people still think, oh, aren't they owned by Acushnet? Like, didn't Ian Poulter used to play their stuff or something like that? Like, they haven't quite joined that. So I guess that's the question too, is what do you want that identity to be now and moving forward? If you could erase people's minds and say, okay, all right, 2022 to 2032, Cobra Golf is what? What does that company become known as?
Yeah, I mean, we've been talking a lot internally about, some of the phrases we've used. And one of them is game enjoyment. We want people to enjoy the game. And you could be Ricky Fowler or Bryson DeChambeau and have game enjoyment by playing really well. Or you could be me and you. I'm playing with my son who's 13 now. My game enjoyment is watching him develop and play and having some little side bets with him that he can only win and not lose, as my wife said. But he picked up more fun with the game because he wants money to go buy video games with. So golf is a way where he and I can spend time together and he can have some fun and get some exercise, but he can win a few bucks if he outdrives me, so that's our game enjoyment. When I'm playing with Jose and some other guys here, it's like, hey, I want to beat Jose.
There's only one way to enjoy playing with Jose, and that's to beat him.
Yeah. So, that's the enjoyment there is we have fun. We trash talk each other and we try and win. And so that's our game enjoyment. You can have game enjoyment anyway, but we want to be the brand that stands for that, however you want to play. Now that's a tough one. It's not as maybe consistent as Titleist has been forever, about their attitudes. Or Ping, or even I would say TaylorMade and Callaway. So the challenge is, hey, how do we get that message out? We certainly have gotten a lot of credit, we feel, for being an innovative company. And not only in the recent time since I've been here, but even when Mr. Tom Crow came over, for a long time, Cobra was always doing things more innovatively and earlier than other companies. And that was a lot of the history of our brand. So it's not just me, bringing that here, or Jose. Sure. That's a brand identity we've had for a long time. So we're going to continue to be innovative, but we're going to be about having fun. And, our players are really about the ones that we think have a lot of fun. Now, a Bryson style of fun is different than a Ricky style of fun. So, it all depends. That's why it's tough to pin those down a little bit, to really in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, and, getting into the Bryson part and Ricky thing and the tour part a little bit as well. You talk about Cobra's history as an innovator, and even going back again, was owned by Acushnet. So under that, where made sense, right? You kind of had Titleist as a brand for better player. I mean, that was the identity, was, this is a brand for better players, etc. And with Cobra, we can try some riskier thing. Maybe we can take some more design chances. We can push boundaries, try different materials. We can maybe live a little bit more on the edge, and that gives us two brands to kind of bounce those ideas off of. But if Cobra is innovative, and if it's going to continue to be innovative, how do you do that in a way moving forward, given some of the restrictions like USGA, RNA, et cetera, are looking to put in place or have kind of put in place? Um, how do you balance those kind of two factors?
Yeah, one of them was a little bit what we just talked about. Hey, every little facet that we can improve helps us make a better final product. So that's certainly what we've been doing along the way, is looking at everything. And we're not afraid to uncover something and say, hey, well, why is it like this? And what can we do to fix that? And so I think that's still part of the character. But, given the rules and regulations, like I mentioned, some things they don't put tight boundaries on. So, these combinations of things, aerodynamics and low CG and, high inertia, and how you design those is really where we think that's a strength of ours. And then part of it is we've been exploring other constructions. I would say there's really, two companies have done the most of that, and that's the guys with the red face, and that's us. They've done the most, exploring. The other ones have done some too, but if you look at the guys in Scottsdale, they don't seem to be exploring constructions a whole lot. There are materials coming out of that. So that's where we've been pushing a lot of the boundaries of things like CNC mill faces, or the way we do the carbon fiber, or a number of other things. The 3D printing, the MIM technologies. All those are really pushing out there to say, hey, we're going to go explore these and see where they give us great performance, and that's what we're going to use them for. So that's been part of the way you work around some of the regulations.
Sure.
Is you work in the places where they're not tightening you down to a CG location or aerodynamics in some ways. There are some rules on aerodynamics, but there are some rules where you have freedom.
Yeah, because you have certain dimensions you have to work within, right? But length, width, height, and some of those kind of things. But you mentioned pushing. We've talked internally a lot where we feel like advancements moving forward, largely coming out of either materials or processes. Advancements in one of those two areas somehow, some way. Is carbon and the application of carbon, particularly in faces like the red face guys, like TaylorMade, is that the next Rubicon? Is that something that, okay, once we cross, you said, and then titanium, aluminum, using tungsten for weighting purposes, is this application of carbon as a face technology the next thing?
Well, I think there's a couple good topics in there, Chris. One of them, that we talked about a little bit was, when you see technologies that pop up from companies, you don't see some following at times, because usually that company that has the technology has intellectual property. And so you can't follow them because they've got the patents sewed up in that area. And in many of these, especially when they're studying for a long time, in the case of some of the stuff they're doing, it took them 10 years, and the first one took them 10 years. So, they've been working on it for part of that, time.
Right? You were there for part of that. So
I think that's part of it, is companies don't follow other companies for two reasons. One is you can't, because of legal issues. And the other one is, why would I do that, right? If you said, hey, it took TaylorMade with all their size and engineers 10 years to do it, and we're Cobra and we're not as big as them, I don't have enough team between myself and Yagli and Jose. We don't have enough bodies to go do something for 10 years and hope it pans out. We have to be a little bit more quick and aggressive because we don't have the size. And so I think that's the other thing. And you won't see, in my opinion, you won't see Callaway copy their face. Why would they do that? They're going to go do something else.
Right. You won't see, because then they're a follower, right?
Yeah.
The last thing Callaway wants to be say, hey, we're going to, TaylorMade did this, so now we're going to that. It seems like there's a difference between trends and like universally changing technologies. So go back to the Pro V1, right? Or solid core balls. That was something that then everybody implemented because the change in performance was so drastic, you're going to obsolete your company if you didn't, right? Same thing with take carbon composites or graphite shafts, right? Nobody's still playing a steel shaft in a driver because if you're a Metalwoods company, you don't offer that, you don't really have a company. But absent that obvious performance difference, we have trends. And so I guess that's the question is, the carbon composite as a face, is that a trend or is it an industry defining characteristic that others are going to follow. It doesn't seem like I don't hear you saying that it's going to become something you're going to see everybody else do because the performance is just so incredibly different.
Yeah, and if you look at what it takes them to do that, we talked about the 10 years that they claim, and all the things that they've shown where they have to build a factory to make these spaces, right?
Right.
We wouldn't invest millions of dollars to make that kind of factory to follow them. That doesn't seem like a smart business play. We're going to go do our own thing, invest our time and energy, and then the other guys are going to do the same. So I don't see it as a strong trend. And of course, they're going to say, "Oh, we're going to do this forever." And they just spent $20 million or whatever it was on building a factory or setting this thing up to do it,
right,
and 10 years of research. So of course they're going to say that.
Right.
So they may continue it for a while, and obviously we'll see what happens there. But one of the things that we talk about is, hey, how do we make it better? And if we could test against them, we would find, okay, I don't know if I would see a lot of the things that they might claim in a marketing world.
Mm-hmm.
In the end of the day, it's the golfer who has to buy the club and decide if that purchase is relevant to what they want to do and how it performs.
Sure.
So we feel our product performs extremely well. In some of the online stuff you guys have done and seen, our product does very well compared to the other technology. So I think that's the trend you don't see. The trends that you see a little bit are, and one of the ones that we felt like we led for a long time, but it was a trend even before we led, it was a hollow iron, and hollow players irons now. It's sort of a hot trend.
It is.
If Tony was here, if Tony was here, he would say, those new Forge Tex irons are the best effing iron I've ever seen.
Best fucking irons I've ever seen in my life. This is Tony's T-shirt. He has them. He loves them. There is nobody that is championing the cause of the new Forge Tex irons more than Tony Covey. And he doesn't really get excited about things that same way. He, frankly, he's hard to impress with a lot of those pieces. And he's like, nope, Cobra nailed these. They look great. They feel great. They perform great. They're what I'm looking for. And he's over the moon, right about those. But that journey started a long time ago for you guys.
Right. And, we had hollow irons that go back to some F6, F7, F8. Those were all hollow. They weren't all hollow with a metal looking back. So I think that was the trend, when Jose and I talk in retrospect, about this. Like, we led that trend from a performance standpoint and making a hollow iron that was a game improvement iron. The one that we didn't quite anticipate was a better player iron in that same construction with an all metal back that looks like a muscle back.
Right.
I was like, oh, darn, I guess we were thinking, hey, this is really better because the CG's lower and all this. And the buyer was saying, I want something that looks like a muscle back, and I'm a 12 handicap. And, I don't even know what low CG is. So that was the one when you think about it, it's like, oh, the industry trend did kind of flow that way. But if we go back in history of hollow irons, there was a TaylorMade ICW series that was hollow. There's been a number of irons of hollow in the 32 years I've been in the industry that are hollow. So now it's come back as a trend. That's something that, we're going to do very well with these new 2 Forge Tech irons. And it's something we've had, in the last couple of years even as well. But we didn't capitalize necessarily to get a big vault in our iron share through that, even though we had been doing it prior to anybody else. So that's where I think the leverage of both the brand, the players, the product all has to merge together and get that wind in the sails.
Yeah. Our boy Bryson, big, bad Bryson. How hard is it to make a golf club from an engineering standpoint for a guy that not only swings it the way that he does, but has evolved and changed? I mean, talk about trying to hit a moving target. Since, he showed up and it was like, oh man, we need some single length irons and we need them like yesterday, to this evolution of what he's become now. How hard is that for you?
Yeah, it was very challenging, Chris. And, you brought up the one length irons. That was also a big challenge for us too, because originally when we talked about signing him, that wasn't really the plan to make his irons. It was to make a game improvement iron. And then all of a sudden we need irons for him. So, our team is a little smaller, but we're pretty nimble, in some of those ways. So we can react. But that still takes time, and I think part of the challenge we had with Bryson was he came out the end the year right after he won, a number of events, and then he says, I'm gonna go put on 30 pounds and start hitting it farther. Like, really? You're like, okay. And then 3 months later, he shows up, he's 30 pounds heavier, and his swing speed has gone up 10, 15 miles an hour. So all the specs of the drivers we had at the time were like, well, these don't work anymore.
They're obsolete,
and how are we
right?
how are we going to find a new spec for him that works? And part of it was, when you think about the distance gain, and let's pretend like for a minute it was a 50-yard gain. Well, if he's hitting it 350 and another guy's hitting it 300, he has to be 20% more accurate to stay in the fairway, because it's just longer. So your angles off the target line get exaggerated. So he's got to be 20% more accurate than somebody that he's 50 yards longer than. So that's the tricky part, is that demand for, I need accuracy and I need distance and speed and all the other playability aspects. So
I mean, is that unfair though, in the sense that
sure
to ask for? I mean, like, you put it next to another guy. I mean, it's not like you have a stable of guys that swing it like that minus, Kyle Berkshire, right? But those guys, I was thinking about this, and Bryson did his long drive competition thing, whatever. They need to hit one shot on a grid swinging like that, right? So these low lofted heads, they're designed for maximum distance, but the accuracy requirement is pretty minimal, actually. Bryson's, he wants, to me, seems like all of both, the distance and the accuracy, to be able to swing it as hard and as long as far as he wants, but to still have the ability to be as accurate as though he were swinging it like you or me.
Right. Yeah. And he has to play the game. You got to play your foul balls. Right. So our challenge, is, first of all, learning, okay, what's he trying to do? Because often as Bryson is focusing on the golf club, he's also focusing on his swing and his physical makeup and his energy and his mind. He's working on everything. I mean, he's very obsessed with getting better at playing golf and hitting the ball far. And so every aspect of what we do with him is, hey, this week I'm doing this. Like, oh, you weren't doing that last week. What does that mean? And how does that affect the ball flight and the impact location and the path and the face angle? And, all those things are really critical to where the ball is going when you're swinging it and hitting it, 200 miles an hour ball speeds.
Right.
And so little variations make a big deal to him. And so that was part of us learning, okay, what can we do to resolve some of the issues? And think about this, Chris. I think the year was 2018. He actually won tournaments with 3 different drivers that year. He won with the old LTD, he won with an F8 Plus, and he won with F9, all in the same calendar year. I've never heard of anybody doing that. And so he's very able to switch quickly and have success with it. And so that's a good thing, but that's also a bad thing, because he can be a little chameleonist from that standpoint and say, well, I want this, but tomorrow I want that. Or I found out I want that something different. So it's hard to do that when you have to make parts. A tool takes still a month or two. And parts still take 2 to 3 months, with normal processes. So if he decides in November he wants a driver because he's swinging 20 miles an hour faster, it's like, well, okay, we don't have that yet, and how do we go make that? That's
not drive through. Yeah, it's not drive through R&D, right? Like you can't do this, and I know Bryson. Everybody's passionate because everybody wants what they want, right? And they want it yesterday. And people have those perspectives, but from an R&D standpoint, you guys are, working your asses off to try and cater to a lot of different things, one of which are consumers, right? Hey, we got to have product that sells, right? Otherwise, not business. Right. We got to have product that supports our tour staff, whether it's, you said Ricky, obviously Lexi, you have a variety of people. And then, Bryson doesn't mind making his feelings known at times. How challenging is that for you when you feel like maybe you get thrown under the bus, or somebody says, hey, what you did wasn't good enough, and you're going, well, what else do you want me to do? I can't bend the time-space continuum.
Right.
I mean, how do you work within that place that can get uncomfortable at times?
Yeah, it certainly can be frustrating. And, we've had some good conversations with him, and he as a young, passionate athlete, sometimes you say some things that maybe you wish you didn't, but you're frustrated and you just want to express it and deal with it. So we've dealt with it. We've talked with him. We've gotten to a better place. I think part of it is the understanding. When you think of the challenges he was having, and I won't go into too many details, but the challenges he was having there's a number of things. There's the club itself. How does the club perform? And we use a robot to simulate that because the robot doesn't go up to his speeds. So we have some good feedback from the robot on some things. Then we have Bryson as the golfer saying, hey, on the 13th hole, I swung like this. I thought I hit it here and it went this way. And I thought it was going to go that way. And we're like, okay, let's, our conversation has been, we don't actually know. We hear what you said and we hear I think I've always said with tour players is when they said the ball went left, I 100% believe that the ball went left.
Right.
Okay. So that's the truth part. The hard part is they say, well, I thought I did this, or I thought it happened like this, or it felt like this. That's the part that's a little fuzzier. Now, again, usually they're pretty accurate. But in some cases, we're like, okay, Bryson, that doesn't make sense to us that it would do that based on what the robot told us and what we've seen with other players, not quite at your speed, but with other decent players.
Sure.
And so then we would say, well, okay, go try and replicate it on the range with a piece of equipment that can measure what we need to measure.
Right.
And the things you need to measure are impact location, face angle, path, all that good stuff.
Get your
right?
GC quad out there, get your TrackMan, whatever. Let's set up the devices and see if we can recreate the problem.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to go to the level of a second source because as we've seen in the world today, if you don't trust the reporting source of whatever it is,
right,
you're not going to buy into whatever the explanation is. So if you don't trust the GC quad giving you the right data for the impact location or the face or the path,
right,
you're going to suspect that. And Bryson I would say he's a highly suspect guy, but that's also part of his challenge to get better. And so if we said, hey, if you don't believe the GC quad, let's go put a high-speed camera while you're hitting the GC quad and compare those two data points. And when you do that, that gets him both two things. One is it solves his conundrum where he doesn't believe the GC quad, or it says the GC quad is part of the problem. Mm-hmm. And then you use more of the other device. So those things are good. Those are all part of the scientific method is you measure it, but if your measurement is suspect, you have to have another way that you can confirm or deny the measurement. So that's been part of this whole learning for Bryson along the way is, okay, can I trust? Now, part of it, interesting, and some things like this, think of the GC quad, right? It's a precision instrument. And Bryson travels with his in a backpack.
Yeah.
So they do sometimes get out of calibration and they do have to get kind of recalibrated. So those are the things he didn't. Oh, he's like, I guess I should probably do that just to double check. As you go back to the science part, which he's good at, go back to the science part. Hey, if you don't trust it, let's get the thing recalibrated and then put it together. And now we're bringing the other unit, and now we could do some good science. And I think part of his challenge as a player is part player and part scientist. So when you're player mode, you're like, oh, that thing sucked and something's wrong and it's not me and blah, blah, blah. That's fair. And that's what, a lot of them have learned over the years. But the other part is the science part is like, okay, what was it? What did we do?
What happened?
How good is our measurement? What do we trust? What do we don't trust? So think of all the pieces of the pie, Chris. There's his swing, there's the golf club, there's the golf ball, right? There's three things that you would say, there's lots of things that we can explore with all of them. Right. And we've looked at a lot of the things in the driver that I would say Bryson and Kyle for sure have brought things to us that I don't think people have studied in the industry before, or questions. Now, the questions may not be questions that are I don't want to say valid questions. They're certainly valid questions.
Well, not applicable.
They may not be something that's worth a good solution,
Right.
But some of them are things that we either didn't look at because we weren't looking at these kind of needs or demands, if you will, from both the guys. How do I hit the ball 400 yards and keep it on the grid? Because even with Kyle, it's not, Kyle is not like a one-shot guy. When you watch these guys, they want to hit the grid all the time.
Sure.
Because they know that ability to hit the grid all the time gives them more chances to win, more chances to swing harder. If they're confident that they got one in the grid, they go swing harder. But a lot of what Kyle does, and there's been a lot of feeding back and forth between him and Bryson, is, hey guys, I still have to find it. I get the one shot every now and then going bad, but I want to get a lot of them in the grid because that means I can win. He also has the whole, I would say, the athlete mentality of if I could dominate these guys and I get 4 in the grid and they get 1, I got a leg up on them both physically, mentally, performance-wise, and I got more
Yeah.
chances to win. So it's not, even long drive is not a, hey, one shot wins you. These guys at the top level, they're as worried about straight as anybody because those grids aren't super wide given how far they're hitting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you haven't even brought into the equation things like atmospheric conditions and air density and weather patterns and wind and things that, and for better or worse, I mean, Bryson's become a face of, this idea of distance and whether or not within all the different skills required to play the game, whether or not we've gotten out of balance in terms of what skills we require. The ruling bodies seem to have decided through their investigative studies, research, whatever, that there's a problem, that distance, the continual, advancement of distance, hitting distances, whatever you want to call it, that it's a problem and it needs to be addressed, stopped. Something needs to happen about it. Why do you think they've decided that there is a problem, and do you agree with them?
Yeah, good question, Chris. That's a good topic we've talked about a lot recently. I think the challenge of what their role is they've got to speak to all facets of the game. And I think if you looked at the facets of the game that are saying this is a problem, it's kind of 3 groups. It's sort of the older professional golfers are saying, hey, that you're letting things go and you're making the game less skilled. I would argue that
kids in their rock and roll music and
yeah. I would argue that if you watch any of these events, these guys have to have all the skills. Golf is not a game of just hitting it far. You got to have every skill. You got to putt, chip, irons, wedges, trouble shots. Everything has to be good for you to win because the talent level is extremely high. So I don't agree with that component saying that's changing the game because I would say the tour game has never been probably more popular recently even without Tiger playing a lot because they're great events and they're great players. I think the second part of that is the old media group, right? The conservative media side of the business. And they're closely aligned with the older tour players and the status quo. The other side of it is sort of the course owners. And most of those course owners are I would say the more traditional ones. But we know when you go back to Marion and have a U.S. Open there, everybody worried that the course was obsolete because of length. Yeah. It was a great tournament, and somebody won. So I don't think, again, that's the groups that are saying it's a problem. We don't agree that there is a problem. We think the game has been very popular lately. I think COVID has helped people understand that golf is an extremely positive activity. People are coming back to the game quite a bit. We're seeing that growth. I think that's something that is really good for the sport. And again, unfortunately, it had a pandemic cause that. But the sport has always been a great sport for a number of reasons. And there's really no amateurs outside, these young elite guys who are obsoleting anything. The rest of us guys, and I know you hit it long, Chris, and you would say,
"Oh yeah, I'm obsoleting."
You're not obsoleting any golf courses, right?
I'm not obsoleting anything except the menu at Wendy's, maybe. There's no. I mean, yeah, even guys that I play with that hit it well past me all the time. They're not obsoleting anything. I caddied in the Corn Ferry event at my home course last year, and there's some guys there that I've never seen anybody take some of the lines off some of the tees that these guys did, and didn't change the outcome. The scores were what they were. You had to chip it, putt it. You had to do different things. There was a penalty for taking some of those lines, and some of those things. And a lot of people showed up to watch these guys play golf. So what's the solution then? I guess moving forward, like from a manufacturer standpoint, I think you're right. I think we hear different groups and they're solid in their messages, but ultimately it comes down to the USGA, R&A, the ruling bodies. They're kind of the judge and jury, so to speak. So what happens? What do you think happens?
Well, we've talked to the USGA and, given them some of our thoughts on the matter. Certainly they've asked for proposals back from us. And, part has been, hey, we don't think the game's suffering. We don't think there's really a distance problem. We could be talked into saying if you don't like the elite game, you could change the elite game if you want. The challenge we have is when people come out and say, and we talked about Ian Poulter, he said, "Oh, make everybody play a 10-5 driver."
Right.
And I said, "Well, that's interesting. Ian's a bright guy, but he's not as knowledgeable as club designers in the sense that if you look at DJ, he plays a 10-5 driver. So it doesn't bother him. If you look at Bryson, he plays a 6-degree driver. So you're going to penalize Bryson 30 yards and not DJ. That's really doesn't seem fair in the interest of the way the sport has been set up. It's like, hey, as long as it's within the rules, you can have whatever specs you want.
Right.
That's something that we don't
fitting variables, right? So things that people are fit around make everybody wear the same size basketball shoes. So if you're in the NBA, everybody gets to wear a 10.5 or 11.5, 12.5.
Right.
So Ian, nice guy, but didn't really think that one through. So are they going to, so I guess, you've been in those talks with them. Any indications from those bodies? Are they going to make some decisions, recommendations? Are we, we've heard 10%, 20%, they want to reduce distances. Like what are you actually hearing from them?
Yeah, they haven't shared any specifics there. They're just saying they're studying it, and we talk mostly to the technical team there, and we've had a great relationship with those guys for a long time. So it's very good. And then, Mike Wan actually was my boss a long time ago at TaylorMade. So, I think he's a good industry vet and very good at looking at a lot of the different facets of this problem. And, I think he'll make a good decision in the end. We've given our input and feel like there's not really a problem with the game. I think the one thing that we know is a lot of the solutions that you would propose in golf clubs would really not make much of a difference. And I think this is the case that we made is, if you said, hey, shrink the head size, and then they won't swing as hard. And we're like, well, if you shrink the head size, it's going to be faster aerodynamically and it won't slow them down. And they're really good and they don't miss the face by much more than 10 millimeters or so. So, really, you're going to think that's going to change them? That's the thing that we would say, hey, this is the reality of what we think would cause this. Now, we did some testing here. Bryson has a very strong lofted 3-wood. As you know, it's about 10 degrees. So we did a test with it's a driver 3-wood
for most of us, spec-wise, loft-wise, Yeah.
So we did that test. We took a 10-degree 3-wood head, put it on a driver length shaft, and tested it against a 10-degree driver. And you can actually swing the 10-degree 3-wood head faster because there's less aerodynamic drag.
Yeah.
So you shrink the size. That means they're going to swing it faster. And you say, well, there's a trade-off for face size and they're going to have more mishits. I said, well, if you ever watch these guys and see how they hit shots and how good they are, the guys who usually win are the ones hitting the center most often.
Right.
And that's the guys that are playing well. They're swinging good. And when we see that, we think that most of the errors they have in directional performance is not because they mishit the club. It's because their face angle or their path or their angle of attack or something in their swing caused them to not present it to hit it good.
Right.
Those errors are typically way more than a little bit of a mishit, because when we design drivers, you design them for, if you're hitting it straight on the robot, you design them for a gear effect to come back to where the straight shot was.
Right.
So if they have a mishit with a square face and path, it's going to come back to the center. You're going to lose a smidgen of speed, but you're not going to lose a lot of direction. When you're 2 degrees off and hitting at 350 miles an hour, you're going to be in the woods.
Right.
So that's a function of the swing, the CG, all the way that the golfers, make their swing, not so much some of the things that they could regulate that would make a difference. So we think a lot of things that you would expect in the golf club heads would do that. Now, if you only change the driver, then what happens? Your 3 would go really far, and what's a driver versus a 3 wood? How do you define that? So the hard thing about this problem, if it is a problem, is there's only one thing that everybody uses and it affects every club in the bag.
It's the ball.
And the Ohio PGA did a tournament many years ago, I think it was 2006 or so, where they used a 15% reduced distance golf ball.
Okay.
And they gave it to the PGA pros there in Ohio, said, we're going to play this course and we're going to have you guys play with this ball and you got to play with this ball. So they played with the ball, and guess what? Somebody won the golf tournament. Somebody had the lowest score. So the game of golf, I think, will exist no matter what they do, and it'll still be a great game. I think that the thing about the golf ball is the golf ball affects not only the driver, the 3-wood, the 5-iron, every club in the bag. And look at some of these guys, how far they hit their irons.
Sure.
It's not just a driver thing that's causing the distances. They're hitting their irons very far because, again, they're extremely good. They practice,
really
they fine-tune their craft,
right?
And they're extremely talented. So that's and look at even Bryson. We talked about him. He says, "Hey, well, if they take 10, 15 yards away from me, I'll just figure out how to swing harder."
Right.
That's what he'll do.
Yeah, we haven't capped out the human component. I think one thing you said to me before when we were chatting too, I think is really interesting is these guys swing hard, not necessarily because of the things we attribute it to, like, oh, these drivers are so forgiving, they can kind of swing with reckless abandon. No, they swing hard because they're really good athletes. They find the center of the face, they're strong, they work out. People have this notion that, even generations ago, that guys didn't necessarily really go after it. Well, watch some old film of Nicholas. I think he went after it pretty good. I think a lot of guys went after it pretty good, and they swung pretty hard at it because they also were really good athletes. We just have a lot more of them now, and people have access to better information as to how to try to optimize those things, right? So, it's going to be an interesting one to, I think, kind of finagle there. I want to finish up with this is the hot or not segment. I'm going to give you a difficult topic, and you get to tell me what you think should happen. All right. So, how should equipment manufacturers handle golfers that decide to play events on the Live Tour? If they do decide to go over, we've talked a lot about the people themselves, but I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying, I won't play those clubs if this player does that, or I will, whatever. Just the other day, I want to say it was UPS that dropped Lee Westwood for sure, and maybe Louis Oosthuizen. I don't know that 100%, but I think that's correct. Obviously, Mickelson went through his thing. What about equipment manufacturers? How should they handle it if and when their sponsored players decide to do that?
Well, that's a difficult question, Chris. We are actually having talks about that now with all these scenarios. And I think, Rick put it very well the other day. He said, hey, if there wasn't interest in, people with money wanting to have golf tournaments, then, there wasn't that conversation, then it wouldn't be something that people would want to do. So he's open-minded at some point. I think there's certainly, I can't speak for everybody politically, but certainly there's reasons why you could say, hey, I want to have a political message there. That's part of it too. I think our challenge is, how do we make better golf clubs? And so, I think we've tried to say, if there's going to be business of golf clubs, we have to figure out, hey, how do we exist in that world? And other companies, I would go back to Dick's Sporting Goods taking out guns out of their stores. And they said, hey, that's what we want to do. And they manage their business to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. If people said, hey, I don't want to be doing that for some reason, we would manage that to say, hey, how do we continue to get golfers excited about our product? So I think that's our answer to that one. That's a tough one, though. But I think what will happen over time is the tours will morph into something in the future that probably isn't exactly what it is today. Yeah. Because there's a lot of money, and because these guys will be willing to play in different places. We've seen this for a number of years, and whether it goes back to Jack and Arnold originally saying, hey, it wasn't a good organization for us for a number of reasons, and they changed it. Yeah. And there's been changes over time to professional golf. I think there will continue to be changes. Our challenge will be, hey, how do we make people love our equipment and want to buy it? Part of that is the athlete sponsorship. So we haven't wrestled with all the answers there with that one, but that's a tough one. We're still thinking about it.
Yeah. TBD on that. We'll see. But thank you, Tom. Thanks for your time. I appreciate it. If I'd love to hear what people think about that with equipment manufacturers. What should they do? What should these guys be thinking about and listening? Because ultimately, like I said, if you can't sell golf clubs, you don't have much of a business, and consumer gets to decide a lot of that. So go ahead, find us on social media. Find me out there, GolfSpy C. Let me know what you think. And until then, next time, we out.